everybody, and welcome to the LTH product briefing. I'm delighted today to be joined by Tim Follett, the founder and CEO of StructureFlow. Welcome. It's terrific to have you here, especially because StructureFlow, which is a company I've been familiar with, and no doubt others have too, for some time, has really evolved over time. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did StructureFlow start, and how is it evolving?
Sure. It started with me as a corporate lawyer, stressed late at night, trying to put a steps paper together and fighting PowerPoint to do it, and thinking to myself, there has to be a better way of doing this rather than moving shapes and lines around on a PowerPoint slide. And that was really the kind of inception of we are trying to create visualization, visual content, and we're using a piece of software to do it that is not really fit for the job. And as lawyers, we're trying to create quite specific visual content, structure charts and flow charts and timelines, and yet we're using a general purpose piece of software to do it, and there has to be a better way. That then led into actually, what am I doing by diagramming in the first place? And taking a step back and thinking about it, actually that process of diagramming is a process of visualizing underlying data. It's just that it's being done by a human being, a lawyer, late at night, stressed, having to read loads of contracts and emails and piece it all together and then start producing that diagram. And so where this has gone is from that initial, how do we speed up the process, to actually, how do we go from 0 to 1 and automate the creation of that diagram, or at least the first cut of that diagram from existing information.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. And I know one of the things you've said to me in the past, which is so interesting, is the process of visualization is so useful in many legal workflows. It's also a way for lawyers to understand better the details of a transaction and to be able to convey to clients in a really visual, clear way the various aspects of a transaction. So I imagine that kind of data-driven, almost learning mechanism is likely another part of the solution in terms of value.
Absolutely. I think there are clearly matters where working visually is absolutely critical, absolutely core to the matter. If you think about complex restructurings, or where you're doing due diligence on complex group structures, or where you're having to think very carefully about tax implications of structuring a transaction in a particular way, this way of working is absolutely critical to that matter. But again, taking a step back, there are also a whole wide range of other use cases where you could not work visually. You could just keep doing what you're doing and not include a diagram, and you'll be okay. You'll be fine. People have been doing that kind of work for a long time without diagrams. But actually, if you use a diagram, you might find that, number one, you think about the fact pattern and all the relevant information in a different, maybe better way, that you're able to see things that you would not otherwise have spotted. And number two, you might find that you're able to communicate with your clients in a far more effective way, because you're not throwing just a whole load of words at them. You are also inviting them in to look at something visual that can excite them and engage them and allow you to talk to them and tell stories to them in a much more effective way.
I love that. Why don't we jump in and take a look at where the product is at now?
Absolutely. Sure thing. This is StructureFlow. It's designed so that if anyone's familiar with Microsoft PowerPoint or Visio, they will feel at home in StructureFlow. You've got a number of different tiles on the left-hand side. In this case, I'm demoing various different types of project, from flow charts through to structure charts. And also, these are the core types of diagram that we can create in StructureFlow, and we can do it really easily. We make creating these diagrams super fast, super quick. So it is just possible with a few clicks to start creating your content without having to mess around with shapes and lines in PowerPoint. You're able to just click and you are already putting that content together. So if I wanted to, for example, show some dollar funding flows moving from that entity to that entity, or from that entity to that entity, You can do it really easily with this shoot and select type mechanism, and you can quite quickly build this content out. You can format all of this in the same way that you would expect to be able to format in PowerPoint, changing the colors, changing the shapes. Everything is basically designed to be super easy, super quick. This is the kind of core diagramming experience. But where I think things begin to get a lot more exciting is what I talked to you about with importing data, so that actually you are not starting with a clean sheet where you're drawing something yourself. Moreover, you are importing an existing piece of data. And that piece of data could be a picture like this. It could be which is in Excel format like this, or it could be something more like this, where you've got a load of text that is basically describing a structure or a process or a series of events. And what we have been focusing on is how can we take each of these different types of content and import them directly into StructureFlow. So if I was to start with, for example, this kind of data set, this is the kind of information you might get from a client about various different corporate entities. And say you're having to work on some sort of entity restructuring or rationalization exercise. It's a PE fund client and they've sent you a whole load of data, and you need to get that into visual format super quickly. In this case here, you've got a whole load of entities that are itemized. You've got information about their tax IDs. You've got state of incorporation, and you want to organize this. Maybe you want to group it by state of incorporation. And you've got the entity types as well. You can just go into StructureFlow and import the data. So if I go here, import my data, start creating, go to Excel, choose my import type. I want a structure chart in this case, and I'm going to display entities vertically. If there's 5 or more children, I can then select the file that I want to import, go down to that trust structure example and hit the button.
Oh, that's so cool.
And in a few clicks, you have that data, which is really nicely imported. You
And
can see here
presumably the additional data you saw on the Excel, for example, state of incorporation and so on, is that represented on this diagram, or is it's added?
yeah, it has incorporated it. So you can see here the state of
Lovely.
incorporations being shown in the top right. And then we've got these codes, which is an additional label that have been added as well into the entity.
That's very clever. I can understand for Excel, it's really cool, but it is structured data coming in with text that's unstructured data. How does StructureFlow deal with that?
Yeah, so we're using a combination of technologies. So for this, we're using something which is algorithmic, and we've built it in a way where the system is going to run through, it's going to look at the structure of the data, the column headings, it's looking for certain types of column heading, it's looking for certain patterns between the column and the row data, etc. And it's actually built in a very flexible way. But to get the best results, you do need to just clean the data a little bit. But we work with our clients to help them so that they know how to do that. But it's actually very flexible. It can do a lot out the box. When it comes to actually the text, we're using the OpenAI service within Microsoft Azure. And essentially, we're using that to pass the natural language and to look for the things and the relationships that it finds in the natural language. And once it finds them, to extract them and to then package that data up in a format that we can then load into our canvas. In this example here, if we were to create a new sheet and we were to go down to the import text option here, we're going to do a structure chart again in this context, although we can do timelines as well, just to point that out. And you just copy and paste that into the box, and the AI service is then going to be looking at that and extracting the entities, extracting the ownership and control relationships, and then building the diagram in the background. So you can see here we've got a successful import of that as shown.
Fantastic.
I'd love to show you the picture one as well. Can I do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to see it.
So we're recording this video on the 2nd of October 2024, and this whole import capability is moving super, super quick for us at the moment. We're releasing at a very regular cadence. And in this example here, we're using the computer vision capability of the Omni model and Microsoft's OpenAI service. And we can basically take a hand drawing like this and go into StructureFlow and import it. So if I was to show you, let's go back to this one here and let's do a new diagram and import image. And I'm just going to browse and select this. And it's doing basically the same thing that the other one was doing, except this time the AI is looking at the image and looking for things it will recognize as entities and ownership relationships between them. So you can see here we've got ABC Holdco, UK, Europe, sub 1, sub 2, etc., and then a ship asset and a plane asset at the bottom. And if we look back to our drawing, you can see it matches what was shown here, scribbled on a whiteboard or a napkin or whatever it is.
That's brilliant. Can see that would be so useful, I imagine, in many instances. Imagine a partner perhaps scribbling something on a weekend and just sending a photo of it to an associate, or as you said, on a whiteboard, perhaps during a meeting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, of course, that's not the end of the story, because the workflow is you need to get the content in, but then you need to be working with it and manipulating it. So that's where the diagramming comes back into play, because it may be that actually you now need to layer in contracts or funding relationships. So this is really your starting point for whatever it is you're creating. It could be a steps plan, whatever it is.
So you can then continue to use the functionality of StructureFlow to add on to this, and presumably you can also slice and dice the data in the back end as well as the diagram becomes more and more complex.
You can, absolutely. And that kind of ability, what we would call modeling, you are no longer diagramming, you are working with underlying data and you are visually modeling it. You are no longer diagramming it.
Well, that's great. Is there anything else you'd like us to see in it?
There is another area that I think is important just for people to know about, which is what we call our sequencing capability. It's what allows you to create steps papers, i.e. where you've got a series of things happening and they're linked together, but they happen sequentially. Very important for tax lawyers or restructuring lawyers or even litigation lawyers who are trying to show a series of events in sequence. So have a capability in StructureFlow where we can create a really beautiful looking steps plan. And the way that we do this is we split the core interface into two, where you have a diagram view, where you have a series of diagrams and you can do whatever you want within this bordered area. But then we allow you to combine that with a report view. And that report view then pulls in the diagrams and then gives you a really nice space where you can actually, more like a desktop publishing experience, you can actually lay in the text and the titles and get this to look really good. And so this type of project is, if I go back to here, what allows you to then within the platform, completely within StructureFlow, this is a dummy law firm branded example, but if you can imagine some of the top law firms, their logos, their color schemes, etc. Instead of this, Emerson Clark, you can have that beautiful branded Law 100, 200 law firm with a beautiful steps paper that is created all within StructureFlow without even having to touch PowerPoint. If you want to use PowerPoint, you can, and you can export into it and it will be fully editable. So clients can edit things, they can move stuff around, everything will be linked together really nicely. But where we're going, where we're trying to get to for our clients is that actually they don't have to go back into PowerPoint if they don't want to. They can use use StructureFlow as a single platform.
So they can actually present from StructureFlow effectively.
Exactly.
That's great. It's terrific, Tim. Thank you so much for showing that to us.
Pleasure.
For everybody watching, what we'll do is put a URL at the bottom of the screen that allows you to reach out to Tim and to his team and to learn more about StructureFlow. But it's been wonderful having you here, Tim, and I think it's really fascinating to see how this area is evolving. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Nikki.
And thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.